Hi, my name is Christy Garner, and this is my action research presentation on restorative practices in the classroom. The first thing I wanted to do with my presentation is show a quick video about how the concept of restorative practices came to be, the rationale for it, and some of the methods that are used with it. Due to time's sake, I am not going to show that to you today, though. Restorative practices actually came from restorative justice, which was a term and a system that came about in the 1970s. Restorative justice is a system of justice. Instead of a set list of consequences for different infractions, restorative justice focuses on the harm that was created to the person. On the right side, you'll see a quick quote from Howard Zerr, who wrote the Little Book of Restorative Justice. He also wrote the Little Book of Restorative Practices. I would recommend both if you are interested in looking at the system. The path of justice to restorative practices, you can read, so I'll do this very quickly. Restorative justice came around in the 1970s in the criminal justice system as a way to subvert the court process and instead resolve things in a different way, like dispute resolution. In the 2000s, it became something that education experts kind of gravitated toward, and it was encouraged by youth professionals and the police as a way of excluding or reducing the exclusion. The first of this practice in the school setting was using restorative conferencing. This process addresses the needs of those responsible for causing harm as well as those who were harmed. This proves effective not only in reducing the use of exclusion, which means like suspensions, but also the reducing of behaviors that lead to those suspensions. And then as it gained steam and support throughout the educational community, schools started using it not only for big infractions, but for small conflicts as well, and ways to prevent those. Today, the schools have leaned toward the phrase of restorative practices instead of restorative justice. They believe that restorative practices encompasses a school-wide philosophy about how to make, maintain, and repair relationships, and it also helps foster a sense of social responsibility and shared accountability. So how does restorative practices work in schools? You'll see a flow chart in front of you, and for time's sake, I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but it gives you a scenario with a student. Carlos had a heated argument with his parents before leaving for school, so he's running late. And then it gives you two different systems. So under the zero tolerance educational system, you'll see that goes the red flow chart. The green one is the restorative practices-based education system. You'll see that Carlos doesn't have anyone to help him or talk to him. He's mainly just told things, given things, consequences over and over and over until he has an arrest record, is facing suspension. Whereas in the other one, people identify him right away as having a troubled morning, or he looks like he's having a bad time. He's scheduled to go with counselors right away, and even when they have an incident in the cafeteria, peer mediators and support staff get down there. They de-escalate, and then Carlos and the other student find a way to repair the harm between themselves as well as the harm done to the cafeteria. My district is implementing restorative practices across the district this year. So in that vein, I thought it would be a great action research question to ask, will the new implementation of restorative practices help lessen discipline infractions as opposed to the traditional system we've used? There are a lot of themes that I found. I'm just going to hit on a few, hopefully briefly. First one is relationships. Basically, every single article I read for my literature review mentioned that relationships are key. They're kind of like the cornerstone. If you don't have that positive sense of trust and support with students, staff, parents, and the community, you're not going to be successful with restorative practices, because you have to be able to have that level of trust and honoring one's privacy and respect in order to get them to open up to you. It does show that there are positive things that come from this. A New York City Positive Learning Collaborative, when they started it, the first year, they saw a 46% reduction in suspensions and a 40% reduction in total disciplinary incidents, and it was determined that in getting those, the most effective teachers in working with challenging students had very positive relationships with them. Another theme that was mentioned over and over again was proactive intervention. In the zero tolerance system, you saw that Carlos had very little proactive intervention. No one asked him, hey, what's going on? Hey, do you need help? It was more just about sit down. Where are you? Why is your stuff late? What's going on? Oh, you did this. Now you're going here. Oh, now I'm taking you to the office. Now you're getting arrested. Proactive intervention is where you use data, behavior trends, and you identify at-risk students through the system so you can be proactive in starting those interventions before it becomes a major discipline problem. So like you might set up time with a social worker for Carlos's case because he had a huge argument with his parents. You might set up a counselor appointment to make sure that he and the other student are okay and talk it out. You might have him go to a small group that is also having problems with their parents at home or that are having problems with anger issues, that kind of thing. Proactive interventions also focus on intrinsic instead of extrinsic rewards. This is different from the PBIS system that we have been currently using across the district and I believe in the greater St. Louis area. Instead of trying to work for something, whether it be a reward or a grade or a prize, the nature of intrinsic reward focuses on the student's self-esteem and confidence instead of being punitive and demoralizing. It's more about the process rather than the result. Last one, equity and bias. It has been clear that there's a long-standing gap in schools, but it's not only academically, it's discipline-wise too. Couple of quick statistics. Under a traditional discipline system, black students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students, while students with disabilities are twice as likely to receive an out-of-school suspension as their non-disabled peers. Another report said that under traditional discipline approaches, 1 in 5 black boys and more than 1 in 10 black girls received out-of-school suspensions. Overall, black students were 3.5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white peers. And even in districts where black and Hispanic students made up over 45% of the student body, 56% of those students were still expelled under zero tolerance policies. So moving into my project, the rationale for my methods for conducting my research were that I wanted to do a multi-approach. I wanted to have some quantitative, some qualitative. And I knew in order to do that and compare the two different systems, I was going to have to make sure that I had data from last year's this year. I also wanted input from the teachers who had taught both years so that I could get staff's perception on how the new restorative practices system is working compared to last year. So to get the quantitative data, I was going to compare the monthly discipline data from 2017-18 to 2018-19. And then I was going to sort through my students. As the music teacher, I teach everyone. Separate students who are appearing to both years and then take their behavior grades for first quarter last year and compare them to first quarter this year. I wanted that so I could have an apples-to-apples comparison for data. I created it and sent out a survey for teachers who had taught both this year and last year at Barrington. And they were designed to get teachers' opinions on how they thought restorative practices implementation was working both in their classroom and the school as a whole. In addition, I asked how many of the suggested practices they used in their classroom and the frequency that they used these practices. It was completely anonymous so teachers would feel that they could be honest. So to get those done, the procedures I went through, I got last year's behavior data from my principal. This year's behavior data I collected from the head of our PBIS committee. I used my grade books from last year and this year to compare student behavior grades, and any student who was not present during both years was not included. I then broke down the remaining 253 students, and I divided them into 2 categories because we give 2 behavior grades, listens, follows directions, and participates appropriately. And then I looked for a positive or negative growth trend between the years. This was done per grade level, and it will also be done by gender as well. For the qualitative data, I sent out my survey on October 30th, and new and retired staff who were not there were not included to keep the survey valid. Over on the other side, you'll see this is my gradebook data. So this is the 253 students that I had 2 previous years. So K to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. You'll notice in the early grades, I have huge gains at first, and then I still have positive gains. And then in the last 2 years, I have quite a dramatic shift into negative gains. My results for my teacher survey are still in progress, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And my results from the school-wide data were done, except I decided to go back and take a more in-depth look. Originally, I was just doing minors and referrals for the months of August, September, and October. And now I've decided to not only do that, but I'm going to do that by seeing the action that was taken by the referrals. So does it go to conferences? How many go to detention, ISS, OSS? Findings and questions. As you saw, my personal study from student to student showed that the positive trends in the lower grade levels and then the negative trends in the upper grade levels. It was surprising to me just because the students have had me for years and years, and I'm very consistent with my practices and procedures, and the students all know me very well. While my school-wide data is not yet complete because I'm doing that extended part that I just told you about, I am seeing a trend in minor incidents, which is the step before referral. However, the issue for discipline referrals is questionable, so I'm looking more into that as I did. That's why I decided to do the further breakdown, so I can see if it's just 1 or 2 students that are skewing these numbers, or if it's just that we're having an increase. Qualitative data has been interesting. Teachers were actually very honest, but I only got 10 responses, so I'm trying to get a couple more before I make any kind of conclusions. Questions and further ideas. I am a person who always looks for the whole in someone's data, and so a couple that I noticed in mine, my first quarter drop in behavior in the upper grades could be attributed to the big changes that happened in those grade levels. So my 3rd to 4th grade, those students are going from, first of all, they were just getting letter grades from numerical grades in third grade, which is a huge switch. And then from 3rd to 4th, they go from one classroom to rotating throughout the day, like a middle school would. And so they have, instead of one room, one teacher, one safe zone, they have up to 4 to 5 teachers with different personalities, different teaching styles, and that can be a huge thing. Also, it could be a change with either new students coming in and changing the dynamic of the classroom, or old students leaving, or it could just be teacher preference or teacher relationships. The school-wide data, like I said, promising with minors, but there have also been a lot of changes to our system with the Restorative Practice Initiative. An example would be, instead of giving 3 minor incident reports before it turns into a referral, we now have to give 5 in a quarter before it can turn into referral. And those are for minor things, not major things. But that would definitely account for a drop in referral rates if that ends up being the case. So that's what I have so far. I hope to have it all done by the end of the term. Thank you very much.